having sex in marriage that you know pleases God is way better than worrying about getting that I'm late text. What's up, fam? Welcome back to our channel. My name is Tim. This is my beautiful wife, Pauline, and you're tuning in to another episode of the W Podcast where you get wisdom in a word with the
Wheeler.
Hey, so we are so excited to be back. We got a fun episode this week because we are answering low-key the top 10 questions, some of the top 10 questions that we get around sex, whether it be preparing for sex, oral sex, how do I handle sex when I have kids. There's so many different questions.
How does it change? Yeah, having kids change your sex life.
That people have when it comes to sex. And let's just start off. We're no experts. All right?
Oh, no.
That's not where we're trying to come from this episode. But already in our almost 7 years of marriage, we have seen some growth, some trajectory in our sex life for the better, which is great. And if you want to know more about kind of our personal journey with that, if you think that would be helpful, giving some practical insight from an actual couple, what they've walked through, if that would be helpful, let us know in the comments and we can do that next week if that'd be valuable. But let us know, because if you don't, then we'll just be like, all right, they don't need it, and that's totally cool. But this week, this all started because of you.
Me?
Because you went on our Instagram and you asked a simple question.
Yeah.
Do you remember what you asked?
We went on there and we let y'all know, what do you want to know about sex in a Christian marriage? Because in my opinion, sex is so gatekept in the church. All we hear about it is just don't have it. If you're not married, don't have it. Don't say it. Don't spell it. It's like the boogeyman word. And I feel like our generation's gotten a little bit better as far as like church leadership and talking about it. But also, if you've been, if you're in your 20s and 30s, maybe you've gotten like 5 or 10 good years of teaching on sex in the church. But honestly, most churches only talk about sex and relationships in February. So you got maybe 2 or 3 weeks of that, and you've had 15, 20, 25 years of bad teaching, of cultural pressure and images and visions and things like that. So it's going to take a while and a lot more kind of diving deep to get a healthy view of sex. And if you're interested more in that, I'm actually going to be talking more about that on my own channel for all the girlies. So stay tuned for that. But as far as today, we're going to dive in as a married couple who's been together, married for almost 7 years, kind of opening the door for you all. And I don't mean the bedroom door, but just the front door to talk to you guys about what sex is like in marriage. And I know there were some concerns. Maybe we can share some of the comments with them on the screen. But it's not about, this episode is not about the act of sex. It's more about your heart towards sex and your mindset towards sex and what does God say about it. So we're going to be answering some questions that you guys submitted through Instagram on the comments there. Some of them are pretty juicy if you ask me, and very, very interesting. So I'm excited to get into it.
Yeah, and I just want to say, disclaimer, if you're single watching this, because I know there's going to be people who are not single watching this as well. That's just how it goes. But if you are single and you feel like this is a vulnerable topic for you, if you're like, I just don't need to hear anything about sex right now because it's going to take me to a place I don't want to go, whether it be desires or past experiences. In that case, maybe add this to your watch later folder on YouTube, save it in your podcast for another time where you may be in a healthier place, because that's not our goal here. We're not trying to take anybody somewhere they don't need to go. This is really out of a heart of service, because while there is obviously extreme value in learning about sex in marriage when you are married, I do think there's some benefit to learning about sex and preparing for it when you're not married, so that you can step into the marriage a little bit healthier than some of us who didn't have any training. So that's our heart with this. It's not to hurt, it's to help. So just, you know yourself. Be mindful.
I mean, and the reality is culture talks and shows so much about sex. Culture is not quiet about sex. You guys can turn on your TVs, open your phone and see anything about sex right now. So I really don't think that the Lord is quiet about sex. The Bible is chock full of sex verses and stories that are still appropriate. It's not graphic or inappropriate, but I do think that it's something that's worth talking about. And I think kind of in the church, we've thrown out the baby with the bathwater and saying like, okay, we can't talk about sex because then people are going to want to do it when they're not supposed to. But then you have people who are in marriage, which is a little bit of what I experienced, where it's like, okay, I'm here now, I'm allowed to do this, but I still have an unhealthy mindset towards it. So we want to kind of unpack that and adopt God's heart, because sex is pure, sex is sacred. It's not something that is dirty that we shouldn't be talking about. It's just a matter of putting it in its right place and its right time.
All right, so you brought up the Bible and sex.
I did.
And I'm glad you did, because I want to do something a little fun. If you've been following us on Instagram for a while, back in 2022, we actually posted a clip we posted a series of verses about sex and marriage that really took off, because people don't realize that the Bible actually says good things about sex.
Yeah.
And I think the problem is the Bible does say a lot of things about what you should not do with sex. That is true, because God is very clear on that. But people miss all the things that God does say about sex and its goodness. So I'm just going to get right to it. And some of this is going to shock you. Some of this, if you got kids in the car, I don't know what you're going to do. But let's just read what the Bible says. Proverbs 5:18-19. These are all New Living Translations. Let her, talking about your wife, breast.
You're pressed about that.
I'm not pressed.
You're pressed.
I'm reading the verse.
You're all ball in your chest.
You let her breast. What do you want me to whisper it? I'm telling you what it says. Let her breast satisfy you always. May you always be captivated by her love. I can't believe the Bible says something about breasts.
Why?
Because you would think the way people talk about sex, that is not going to be mentioned. They're not going to mention anything pleasurable when it comes to sex. Let's keep going. Song of Songs, Song of Songs, chapter 7, verse 8. I said, I will climb the palm tree and take hold of its fruit. May your breast be like grape clusters and the fragrance of your breath like apples. He said, I'm trying to climb that tree. I don't know if she was taller than him. I don't know what it was. Boy, I'm just reading the verse.
The thing is, y'all should see literally the notes. Everything is in all caps.
No. So it does say that, but I promise you this because I copy and paste. I did not put this all
Yeah, but your voice is not copy and pasted.
Because people act like God didn't create sex.
I don't know. I mean, that's what we're trying to talk about right now.
People act like sex is not something that should be pleasurable or enjoyable. And we are debunking that right now. Song of Songs, chapter 7, verse 2. Between your thighs.
Yo, it says yo.
Between your thighs lies a mound of wheat bordered with lilies. Now, I know some of this poetry writing may be throwing you off. You may not understand, like, why are we talking about flowers, talking about thighs? I think we all know what he's talking about in between the thighs. And notice here that it's in a pleasurable light. Last one. I hope you're having as much fun as Pauline is. Song of Songs, chapter 8, verse 10. I was a virgin. Was. Like a wall.
I remember it.
Now my breast. Here we go. They love breasts in the Bible.
You love these verses.
Now my breasts are like towers. When my lover looks at me, he is delighted with what he sees. She said, I know I got it and I know he like it. So what's our point in reading all that? Our point is to say, you probably never knew the Bible had those verses in it. And if you did, you may have forgotten that it's okay to want sex to be pleasurable. It's okay to be excited about it when it's in the right context, which is marriage. And the problem is, a lot of us know that sex can be enjoyable and feel good because maybe we've experienced it outside of marriage. And if you know anything about our story, we did not have sex together before marriage, but before we came to know the Lord, we both did have sex outside of marriage. So we both knew, all right, we know what sex can be, but we didn't fully have a true picture of it, because honestly, you can't know the fullness of something if you are not using it the way the creator of it intended. I can't take a microphone that the creator created to amplify my voice and try to use it as a hammer and then be upset that it's not putting a nail into place the way I want it to. That's not what the microphone was created for. The same thing goes for sex. You can't be upset that sex was created for the context of marriage by God, and the fullness of its experience and intimacy and pleasure is supposed to be there, and then be mad when you're out here doing it with so many other people and you're not getting the same results. That's not what the creator of the thing created it for. And that's what we want to get back to, is what did God intend? How did he create it? And then practically, what does that look like living out as somebody who's single, trying to prepare for marriage? And then maybe you're not single and you're watching this and you're like, I've already done some things. How do I get it right? We want to kind of talk about it all today. All right, so I really am excited to get into these questions. Let's just get started right away. The first one, and I'm coming to you, so I hope you got it. Somebody wanted to know, how do you know if you are sexually compatible without test driving the car?
Yeah.
Have you test driven every car you ever drove? Sorry,
You ever owned, you mean?
Whatever.
That's a very good question. And that's a very good, like, follow-up to what, or, like, kind of lead the way to what I was thinking and what I have heard before, too. Because at the end of the day, a car is a car. If it runs, it has a transmission, an engine, you get the keys, it's going to drive, right? You're a person, you're a driver, you can drive any car. You got hands, you got feet, you have a driver's license, you can drive almost any car, standard car. And the same goes for men and women. And I think so that's the whole like sexual compatibility thing is a lie and kind of like a deception method from the enemy to make you think like, oh, kind of like the whole thing with like the one and always our spark and like kind of these whimsical out there ideas that people can kind of convince themselves or give kind of leeway as to why something cannot work or a relationship cannot work a way out.
And just not biblical. When God brought Eve to Adam, he didn't say, hey, God, like, how do I know if we sexually compatible? Like, that wasn't a thought.
But let's think about what compatibility is, right? Compatibility.
I got some definitions.
And you'll share them. But at the end of the day, compatibility is do you suit one another? Do you fit together? The suitability thing with Adam and Eve. And if you have a vagina and he has a penis, you will be compatible. That's really all you need to know. Now, if we're talking about, oh, is it awkward? Do they know what I like? Do I know what they like? You don't know what anybody likes. You have to learn all of those things with everybody. So, and I know that, again, I think a lot of us have like kind of believed in this question and this mindset. Everyone's had it, so it's not like a shame thing. But I think it just shows so much how, at least in the U.S., the media has lied to us and put us in this mindset of kind of this Cinderella story. And when you meet somebody, it should be easy and come together and sparks fly and all these things. And that's really not biblical love. Biblical love is a process. Agape love is unconditional, and you want to be with somebody who's going to say, hey, I know that this is not the best that it could possibly be right now, but I am so excited to learn with you along the way for the rest of our lives. I want to know what you like. Just the same way you meet somebody and they don't know what your favorite restaurant is until you tell them, or until somebody, you know, your sister or your best friend tells them, hey, she really likes this type of gifts for her birthday. Like, everybody has to be taught things. And yes, of course, there are things that are natural that come along and like, but most of the time it's not natural. It comes from observation, what you learn from somebody. And that applies, you know, in the bedroom and with sex as well. So, you know, there's statistics that show couples that live together and have sex together before marriage actually end up getting divorced more likely than couples who abstain and who wait to live together until they get married, because they honor covenant. Because if you have the mindset of, oh, well, we need to be compatible, I need to know that we're sexually compatible before we get married. Well, what happens when you're 5, 7, 8, 9, 10, 15, 20 years into marriage and you're not feeling compatible anymore? Because you've changed, he's changed, someone's gained weight, people have had kids, well, the woman has had kids. You know, your bodies are going to change. Women's sex drives go up significantly as they age. Men's usually go down. You could argue at that point there's sexual incompatibility. That's when we go back to covenant and we rest on covenant and we say, hey, I know that things have changed, but I'm still committing to learning the new version of you because I love you. I'm committed to you as a person. And that's the way that the Lord loves us. So I think that it takes more, the enemy and the world wants us to think, oh, love is, let me try this out. Let me see if this is what I want and this is what works for me before I make a commitment. But God says, I'm committed to you no matter what it looks like, no matter how awkward this is for a little bit in the beginning. And a lot of times it's not even awkward because that's your best friend and you guys have built up security and love and safety throughout your dating and your engagement period. That is it vulnerable? Yes, but it's supposed to be vulnerable and that's what makes it beautiful.
Yeah, and I get that doesn't sound sexy. And I get that it doesn't sound like the romantic, spicy love that you may want. And that's why we really have to be mindful about how we're coming into marriage and what mindsets we're bringing in. We all know when we get saved that I got to change the way that I think about lying. Yeah. I got to change the way that I think about stealing or whatever it may be. We don't always think, I got to change the way I think about sex. The Bible says it like this in Romans 12:2. Don't copy the behaviors and customs of this world, but let God transform you into a new person by changing the way you think. If you can be honest with yourself, have you given the Lord the opportunity to change the way you think about sex? Mm-hmm. Or has it only been what culture has said, what music has said, what movies have shown you? Is that how you still think about sex? And if that is the case, please hear us. There's no shame. Mm-hmm. But we are challenging you to allow the Lord to have a say in the matter. So I love that you said that. I want to give quick definitions because you mentioned compatible. What does it really mean? Let's just go to the dictionary really quick. Webster says compatible means capable of existing together in harmony. If you don't know what harmony means, one of the definitions is pleasing arrangement of parts. So if you and your spouse have the right parts, what Pauline mentioned, you can certainly learn how to arrange something pleasing in bed.
Definitely.
Which will then make you compatible. The whole key here, if you haven't gotten it already, y'all, is sex is supposed to be a journey that you and your spouse take together in marriage, and that's a privilege.
Right.
Like that should be exciting to you. Like, oh, I get to learn what my partner wants and what he needs and what she needs in this space. And one last thing before we go to the next question. You have to realize that every area of your marriage, you're going to have to learn how to do it. Whether it's learn how to talk about money, learn how to talk about somebody passing in the family and processing that, learn how to do a lot of different things. We don't really want to learn how to have sex with one another for whatever reason. And nobody that's learning how to do something, whether it's a baby learning how to walk or talk, nobody knew how to do that from the beginning. Mm-hmm. It's something that you had to constantly work on. Right. And if you ever seen, we have a baby right now who's 1 year old, and he can get frustrated if he's trying to talk, or he's actually kind of good at walking, but if he's trying to talk,
he's a runner.
And he's getting frustrated, he doesn't say, you know what, I'm never going to try to learn how to talk. He just keeps trying to talk and communicate. And I think that's where we have to get, and I'm getting a little ahead of my notes here on one of the other questions, but when you're in a marriage with somebody, you are going to get frustrated sometimes, potentially. You
definitely get frustrated.
Well, some of y'all may just hit it off the park, and that's just good for you. But if you do get frustrated when it comes to sex and marriage, that's okay because that means you're learning. Mm-hmm. And don't allow that to mean you should give up. Right. Allow it to mean we got to have a lot more practice.
Yeah.
Let's go to the next question.
I didn't want to have sex on my honeymoon. Is that normal? This is from the woman.
I didn't want to have sex on my honeymoon. First of all, what is normal? I think we just say that. Like, what is normal? But if I had to do a yes or no to this question, I would say no, even though there's a lot of women who would say yes.
Yeah,
So, let that be what it is. But the reason I say no is because I'm not really saying normal, but is it healthy? Is it best? And one of the reasons why it's hard to really give a yes or no here is because there's not a lot of context to this. Now, obviously, if it's initially when I read this, I read wedding night. And there's a lot of people who don't have sex on their wedding night. And that's okay if it's because y'all are just exhausted from a long wedding. And like you got the next day and then it's fine. But as far as like the whole honeymoon, however long that was, you just did not want to do it. I would say that's something at the very least that you should take to the Lord. Mm-hmm. Because in my opinion, and you correct me if I'm wrong because I'm not a woman, but in my opinion, if you're not excited, or they didn't even say that. They just said, I didn't want to. If you don't want to have sex at all with the person that you just got married to me, there's either some trauma or some shame or both that has not been dealt with. Mm-hmm. And maybe you don't realize that, which is okay, as long as you don't stay there. Yeah. And the only way you can't stay there is if you actually address it. I think sometimes, and you already are trying to do that by asking this question, but I think sometimes it's so easy to notice we have feelings but not investigate.
Yeah. And that was, I had that issue.
So just go.
Myself.
Oh, go.
I was saying I had that problem too, where like things would come up in the beginning of our marriage, and it definitely started in our honeymoon, and I was kind of like, all right, Lord, like the Lord was talking to me about it, but I kind of just put it in my pocket and kept moving. Like I didn't investigate, and I should have. So don't do that. Because not being too tired to have sex on your wedding night is one thing, but not wanting to even try or attempt to like make some progress, especially like I don't know what your husband's like where he was at, if he's like, hey, what, like, hello,
let's go,
yeah, like waited my whole life for this, and you're putting it off, like what's going on. But I think it sounds like there may be something else going on, and again, this is why we're having these conversations, because you're not the only one who feels this way. And it's kind of like, why is this? Is it because I don't feel prepared enough? I don't feel like I'm going to do a good job. I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know what I'm supposed to do. It could be a lot of things. You can kind of have like a blockage or something like that, which is something I feel like I had the first couple of years.
What do you mean by blockage?
Like a mental block of like not being free and not being excited about it. Because if somebody told you like, hey, I have $100,000 for you, and you're like, yes, like this is, answer prayer, like God has provided, like you'd be excited. God is coming through as a provider, just as he's promised that he will be. And if sex is a gift, like we believe that it is, and we read those verses, that the Lord is saying, like, enjoy this. This is something that's to be enjoyed. It's a gift, and you don't look at it that way, but you don't even know that you look at it that way. And that's the dangerous, I don't want to say dangerous, but the tricky part about trauma and sin, which everybody has both, is a lot of times you don't know what you don't know. If you knew what your problem was, you would have just gone and gotten it fixed. But you don't really know that's a problem. It's because a lot of times we live in a world and a culture that deems sin as normal and deems sin as personality traits and character traits. So to say like, oh, a woman is bashful or shy in the bedroom, that's not necessarily something bad, but it's like, oh, if you're a lady in the street, the freak in the sheets, and it's like, a lot of guys would like that, but girls have not been taught that is what you should aim for in marriage, and not even just girls, but just women in the church too.
So that's kind of going to the next question, so we can just go there. Mm-hmm. How did you transition from refraining from sexual activity? This is a real question somebody asked. To being married and no longer having to abstain. Was there any, and you already started going into it, but were there any mental hurdles or conversations needed to have as a couple to feel comfortable in exploring one another sexually?
Yeah. I mean, do you remember some of the hard conversations we had, don't you?
I do, and I think we definitely should go, that should be a whole separate
next week
podcast to me next week if y'all want that, because I think there's a lot more to that. But just in general, mentally, do you think, I have a question, do you think the mental hurdles had to do with what you were learning in the church as far as, now that you're single, don't have sex? Or was it more because of past experiences you had? Do you think there was some shame there?
It was both. And I literally, for all my girlies watching, I literally recorded the YouTube video that I'm talking about before we sat down to record this podcast. So I'm excited to share that with you all. So I go way deeper into it, but to give a little kind of like trailer for it, I guess, the best way that I can describe it was when I got saved, when I was a freshman in college and decided to live for the Lord and to abstain from sex, I stopped the bleeding, but I wasn't healed from that wound. And not only was I not healed, I wasn't working on healing. And what
was the wound, just to be clear?
With sex and trauma, or not trauma, but just sexual sin, and how I viewed myself because of my decisions and because of my actions. And my mind wasn't renewed towards sex. I think through salvation, my mind was renewed towards God. And I viewed the Lord as my Father and as Lord and as somebody that I could trust and lean on, and that was going to guide my life. And obviously those things are true. But I don't think that I didn't take the time to sit with him and deal with how I viewed myself because of my decisions. It was kind of like, just stop doing it, and which I did. But it wasn't like, okay, now I need to look at sex instead of this bad, dirty thing that made me into this bad, dirty person. I need to look at it as something that's beautiful, that's sacred, that's something to look forward to, something to be excited about. And I think on the surface, like when we started dating, I was okay, like, yeah, now I'm getting excited. Like we have all this chemistry, if you want to call it that, connection, blah, blah, blah. But I didn't deal with the whole, what I thought about sex, because I thought of sex as like, okay, this was something that was supposed to help me and that was supposed to make things better for me when I was younger, and it didn't. And in a way, it kind of failed me. And I'm glad to be rid of it now as a Christian. And so much of Christian culture is anti-sex. So it's like, to be a Christian is to be against sex, is to be against sexual things.
That's how I felt for you.
Yeah. And like, I mean, a lot of times in culture it's that way too. Like, don't watch this, don't read that, don't dress this way. Everything is sexual. Sex is bad. And we don't talk well enough of sex. It's not like oh, sweetie, don't wear that skirt. I wish you would. Your body is so beautiful. It's not for everybody to see. It's, and I'm not doing a job of like wrapping it up for everybody right now, but I think it's more of like, women are taught how much of an asset your body is and how much men want it, which, that's true. But I think that there's not enough kind of beauty in the reveal of marriage and like the sanctity of marriage and the privacy of marriage, of like, the whole idea of, saving yourself for your husband. It's like, okay, some guy that I don't even know, do I think he's going to be nice, or is he going to be a jerk like these other guys that I've met and that I've dealt with? You know what I mean? So the idea of like saving yourself is not really like that appealing in a lot of ways, or safe. But I wish it was more of something that we looked at kind of like birth, where it was like, oh, one day I can't wait to have a baby. And we all know that babies are cute and cuddly and all those things. But giving birth is a very messy process. But we don't focus on that. We focus on the glory of the baby that's coming afterwards. And the same is not for sex. And it's a little bit more complicated than that, of course, because having a baby is usually, every baby is only born once, versus sex is pretty much a regular habit that you're doing in your marriage. So I think it's and also in our culture in the U.S., sex is very much, everywhere. It's like kind of this tool of power that men use and women use. A lot of men, of course, use sex to kind of, power over women, and like, you know, someone asked a question about rape, and like, can a husband rape his wife, and things like that. And even for women, knowing like, oh, I can, and this is how I felt, you can use your body to manipulate men and get what you want, and if you show a little leg, a guy will buy your drink, you know, stuff like that. So I think it's not, again, it's just so polluted what God's view of sex is. It's something that's private, that's something that is very sacred. But you know, the enemy does that. He pollutes and divulges everything that God makes.
Yeah, and I'll just say for the men, and hear us, we don't want to generalize this and say that all women are going to struggle with the transition to marriage and all men are just going to be great with it, because it definitely can be the other way around. But in general, it seems to be this way. And if that's the case, whether you're the man or the woman who is ready to go when you get married, if your partner is not on the same energy level as you when it comes to excitement for sex and wanting to do it all the time when you first get married, please don't rush them. Like, be patient with them in the process. And I know that can be frustrating as well on your part, but that's what you signed up for, low-key, in marriage.
Hikey.
For better or worse, for richer or poorer, for good sex or bad sex. Like, you said I do to that. So you need to be patient with this person, and that's easier said than done. I was not always patient, and we can, again, get into that next week. But it's something that you want to try to do, because ultimately that patience will only help you and your partner get to a healthier place, because it can show your partner that you're somebody that they can trust.
Right.
Because one of the reasons that they may not be super excited about sex, or why they may have a mental hurdle, is like Pauline said, they've had past experiences and it didn't go well in the end for them. Maybe it was with somebody that they ultimately learned they couldn't trust, or they were hurt by it. And you doing things that hurts them more is not going to make them want to do it more with you.
Right. It's kind of reinforce their limiting belief, or the lie that this is not something that they can lean into and trust, and they have to protect themselves.
All right, next question. What does the Bible mean by the marriage bed is undefiled?
Yeah, that's one of those churchy words, like biblical words. You don't hear anybody else use that word outside of like a biblical context, especially with sex.
Yeah.
Like that's when someone hears like, oh, what's biblical sex? As everyone says, like, oh, it's marriage bed is undefiled. What does that mean? I don't know. But yeah, I mean, this Webster definition says not made corrupt, impure, or unclean. It means it's free from shame or blemish. So when I first kind of read that, I thought like, oh, it's like, you know, a marriage bed, the bed that's shared by two married people, it has like immunity. Like, there's nothing within the marriage bed that cannot be blessed between the two people. So obviously that can open up a lot of doors of like, oh, well, what's okay? Or is toys okay? Is this okay? Is that okay? We're not going to get into that stuff, because this is a dating podcast, relationship podcast. This is not about, you know, having great sex in marriage, because most of y'all are not married. But we do want you, of course, to be the best that you can be walking into marriage whenever that does come for you. And there's nothing wrong about learning. This is more about, again, learning God's principles in general. And God does speak about sex in the Bible. Anyway, so when I think about that, it's more about, okay, so what is allowed? What's undefiled means what? Like, we can do anything, like, but if it's immunity, like anything we decide to do, like if I do it with my spouse, it's cool. And I feel like when I thought about this and was reading about this, I thought about covenant and what is between what's upheld by the people in the covenant, right? Because our marriage is between me, you, and God. So whatever between you, your spouse, and God, that's what's agreed upon, right? And we look at God's word to see what God says about it. And I feel like if we're going to look at it that way, this verse is like, well, whatever's between y'all, whatever y'all agree between is fine. And then some people can think about, oh, well, what about bringing in another person, all those different things? That person's not in covenant with you. So even if, because there are people out there who talk about swinging and things like that, and it's like, well, that's not, even if you're a consenting adult and you both consent to bring somebody else in, Like, that person is not in the covenant with you. They're not in the covenant. They're not in the marriage bed. Like, now the marriage bed is defiled because you're bringing in somebody who's not in the marriage. So as long as it's between you two, and like, because everybody has different preferences. And I think what this really is about is like communication and knowing and talking to your spouse. And this is why it's really, really important when you are dating that you develop really strong communication skills as much as you possibly can, because the communication is only going to get harder when you get married, because you're going to have more and more sensitive and vulnerable things to talk about. So finding out, hey babe, what would you like? What do you want tonight to look like? What's on your wish list? What, if we could have any type of night, what type of night would you want to have? And that doesn't mean you have to say yes to everything, but it's more learning about like, oh, this is where his head's at. Oh, this is where her head is at. This is what would make her feel comfortable, and having fun with it and exploring and trying different things out. And I'm not even talking about like literal sexual things, but it's more about like, oh yeah, like I would really like a back rub. I would really like this type of dinner. I really want us to watch a movie together before, whatever. Like, it's all those sort of things.
You're not saying that you're going to have that conversation every single time you and your spouse are intimate together. Because I think I could just see somebody hearing that and be like, that's like
boring.
And that's not what you're saying. But you said something that I think is really good, and I want to highlight more. The marriage bed being undefiled, you mentioned how marriage is a covenant between you and your spouse, two people only.
God, yeah.
And the only time you bring another human inside of the marriage bed essentially is when you are defiling it.
Right.
And I think that is really interesting when you think about it in that context, because right after where it says the marriage bed, and let me just read it because I lost it. It says marriage is honorable among all and the bed undefiled. Right after that, the Lord puts, but fornicators and adulterers God will judge. Adulterers. Why do I struggle with that word?
It's not an easy word.
And I think we don't miss the connection there. Like, there's nothing in the Bible that is by accident. Everything is placed strategically for you to understand what is happening. And marriage is honorable among all, the bed undefiled, but fornicators and adulterers God will judge. And I think it just highlights the point that we're trying to have here. Anytime you bring someone else to the bed, you're defiling it. So whether that's a threesome that you mentioned, whether that's you're in the bed with your wife but you're thinking about your ex, or whether that's pornography, you are undefiling the marriage bed at that point, because like Pauline said, you're breaking the covenant with each other. So that's what you want to think of when it says, what is the marriage bed? What does it mean when it's undefiled? It's whenever you're bringing somebody else into the bedroom that's supposed to be exclusively between you and your partner. So let's go to the next question. Do you want to read it?
How has sex changed for you guys since having kids?
How has sex changed for you guys since having kids? Good question. I think a lot of people have concerns over this.
Fears.
Of our sex life was good, and then you have kids and you hear it goes down the drain. Mm-hmm. And I know after we had our second, it actually has been better than ever for us personally. I don't know. I think a lot of that is because we were already heading in the right direction, and we can kind of share, like I said, next week of how do we even start getting on that right direction. But I feel like after our first, and you can speak to it more, it was a little more of a struggle, at least mentally for you. But it sounds like in the beginning it was always kind of mental. But do you feel like it was
I think that
extra?
Made it worse, at least for a short period of time. Yeah, I mean, this is a good question, because sex is already harder for women. Like, it's more complicated for us physically to climax than it is for men. And then, like, all the complicated, like, our anatomies are different, all those different things. And then when you have children, of course, people are afraid, like, oh my gosh, am I going to snap back? Am I going to be the way that I was before? Like, is it going to feel different? All those things. And then on top of that, you're tired. You are probably not sleeping if you're anything like me. You are breastfeeding, possibly. So then, now your body is changing and becoming more than just something that's for your husband. It's something that you're sharing with your baby every 3 hours. So it's very demanding. You probably have, maybe you have stitches in places, and like I did after our first. Well, I had stitches after both, but yeah, it just it's a lot of change for women, and it can be exhausting and depleting. And then, you just have some concerns about adding basically like another task onto your already very heavy load. So I think that it got hard after our oldest, because I was feeling a lot of body shame already. And again, talk to you girlies about this and over on my own YouTube channel, because it's like definitely girls room talk. But it really affected my confidence a lot. But then after our second, my confidence was way higher. So I'm very thankful for that. But also, a lot of it just depends on so much about how your birthing experience goes, not just mentally, but also physically too. Because, for our first, I had a C-section. For our second, I had my first vaginal birth. So that obviously, it's like different experiences and effects of your body and things like that. But I think it is, at the end of the day, all mental, because your bodies are made to go, I don't want to say go back to normal, but at least the body parts you need to have sex go back to normal. It's going to be a different normal, but they're all like, if you're cleared to return to activities as normal, like you're fine, even though it's not maybe what you were used to. But I had to also come to a place even before having children of realizing like, all right, everything is about to change with my body, but that's okay. And this is why God wants us to wait to have children in marriage, in the covenant, in the safety and protection of marriage, because you don't have to worry about, is he still going to love me or like my body or all those things? If he's a healthy man, he's going to appreciate you for who you are, number one, and also understand, like, you just birthed his children. Like, this is not, he's going to be grateful for every stretch mark and, saggy, whatever, because he knows what it means. It means something. Now, obviously, you may be sitting here like, Pauline, I don't even care what my husband thinks. It's more about what I think about my body, and I don't like my body. I don't like the way that I look, because honestly, as a woman, that's how I feel. Like, a lot of times we don't dress for guys, we dress for ourselves, because we want to look cute, or we want to, kind of not blend in with our friends, but it's like, I want to wear cute clothes too, and look, if she can have tight and right, then why can't I? All of those things. So it can be tough, but you have to be very gracious and patient with yourself, even like the first couple of years after having children, and realizing like, okay, it's going to be different, but it's still going to be beautiful. And hopefully you are in a marriage where your husband does everything that he can to help you see yourself the way that he does, in a loving, beautiful way. But I think you have to realize you're not supposed to look the same after you have a child. You're not supposed to look like somebody who doesn't have a child when you have a child. So it's very hard to come to that place, because you've known your body for 20, 30, 40 something years before you had kids. And then now it's like getting to know and accepting this new body, kind of like puberty all over again. When you go through, you're like, what's happening to my voice? And I have pimples and all this stuff. And it's like, you're growing up, and like, it's the same way, but now you're growing up as a mom, and you're becoming a new version of yourself. You're transforming, and there's physical changes in that. So I think you just have to learn to appreciate and like see yourself afresh and anew, and not compare the mom you to the non-mom you, and love her, because I really don't think you can have the best sex life that you can in a loving, healthy marriage unless you are confident in who you are, like 10 toes down, no matter who you're married to. It's not really about your husband, it's about you, and you knowing like, I'm worthy of good sex because that's what the Lord wants for me, and I want all that he has for me, and coming with that mindset. Yeah, that is good. And I just want to flow right into kind of a similar topic that somebody else asked, is how do you still find time for intimacy after having kids? And I think a lot of these questions, I could see somebody asking them out of fear. Yeah. Like, I don't want my sex life to be bad. I don't want my sex life to change with kids. I don't want my sex life to end up in my spouse forgetting about me and my needs once we have kids. And I think we just have to remember that the Lord hasn't given us a spirit of fear, but of peace, love, and a sound mind. And I just think we have to work that out even
a little bit before we get married of just fear in general.
Yeah.
Some people are just afraid to get married. Like, I'm afraid that this relationship that I have with this person that I'm dating, which is great, is going to change when we get married.
Yeah.
And it's just, what is it in me that is afraid of the unknown? Kind of. You could think about it in that way. And just remembering that no matter what season or stage of life we step into, the Lord is with us.
Yeah.
And He is there to help us navigate that season. And your sex life is no different.
Mm-hmm.
So for us, how do you still find time? I think you have to prioritize it. And I think that looks like, again, going back to working it out with your spouse and learning your spouse. You got to figure out, and it takes time, what works for you and your partner. Because there's so many people who will tell you, oh, you just need to schedule sex.
Yeah.
And like, there's nothing wrong with that if you do that and you want to do that.
It works for you.
And it works for you. We try scheduling sex, and for us, it just doesn't work. Not that we wouldn't do the act, but the act wouldn't be that great for us because it just felt too forced, or one of us just wasn't in it, and it just didn't work for us. And we had to figure out after 5-6 years of marriage, like, all right, this actually, when we are more chill and relaxed, this works. And we can go more into detail again next week about that. But I think it's important to remember that it's a journey. And you're probably sick of hearing that, but it is a journey. Next question for you might be quick, unless you want to speak to that a little bit, what I just said.
Yeah, intimacy after kids. I think that you have to you have to adjust your expectations. Now, it all depends on what your sex life was like before you have kids. And if you are like already a parent watching this and you've never been married without kids, like, that's different. But if you had like all this time in the world and wine and dine, it was a whole marathon every time you guys would get together, you probably have to drop your expectations a little bit more. And this isn't a parenting podcast, but this is the whole thing about, you know, making sure your kids are sleeping through the night and sleeping in other rooms and not sleeping in your bed. It's going to be a lot harder to get back to intimacy if those things are not in place. So it is a process, but I definitely think that it's everything is harder with kids. Like, that's not a lie, but it's supposed to be harder. And like, God has not called us to live easy lives. God has called us to make disciples, and having children is a really great way to make disciples. So I think that, again, back to the whole fear thing, if you're like, oh, kids just seem like they make everything harder, they make my sex life harder, or maybe you've seen friends when they tell you like, oh yeah, once the kids come, like, you're done, and
You're done.
you're cooked. It doesn't have to be that way, but again, everything rides and falls on your communication as a couple. So you have to really work your communication skills very, very well and refine them and continue to refine them with every major life transition that you have, kids or not.
And can I just say, because we talk to dating couples, this is why learning how to communicate when you're dating is so crucial. We talk about that so often because it's going to be much easier to have conversations about sex in marriage safely.
Yeah.
And feeling like you can trust them if you learn how to communicate about everything else before you got married.
Yeah, I mean, you can't get to level 10 without passing through level 8 and 9 first. So don't skip any steps when you're dating. Have hard conversations. The Lord will, and just life, will bring up hard situations. If you guys are dating for 6 months, a year, things are going to come up, and have those conversations. And that's why a lot of married couples don't do well, because they don't know how to communicate. It's not because they don't love each other. They loved each other, they got married. It's just a matter of communicating well. So yeah, you have to prioritize it, adjust your expectations. I think having a rhythm and a flow helps and works. And then, like, again, it's not always going to be, whining and dining Ruth Chris. Sometimes Chick-fil-A, sometimes McDonald's gets the job done. Everybody loves a Happy Meal. And Happy Meal, happy ending. That's what I thought. But anyway, yeah, I think it doesn't have to be complicated. It can be simple if you both are on the same page.
Yeah. So this leads us into the next question, because you said something that sparked something for me, Somebody asked, how can I teach my spouse what I want? And for most people, your sex life will never be better than your ability to communicate with your partner. So if you're not good at communicating with your partner, your sex life will most likely not be good. Now, some of y'all, it just comes naturally for whatever reason, and your communication sucks, but y'all sex life is on fire. That is what it is. But for a lot of people,
but your marriage is not great though.
There you go. For a lot of people, if you're not communicating, if you're not in a good place, your sex is not going to be in a good place. Why do I bring that up? Because you can't teach your spouse what you want if you don't know how to communicate. Mm-hmm. And you're not going to be comfortable communicating with your spouse what you want if you don't feel like there's a safe space or that your spouse will react in a safe way when you tell them what you want. Because nobody likes to share vulnerable things to their partner and then their partner blows them off or says you nasty for wanting that or whatever. So learning how to have those conversations with your partner is important. And I think if you don't have, especially if you're married, if you don't have meetings regularly where you can have conversations safely, that could be an opportunity to start introducing those and then have it there. But for a lot of you, maybe you already have decent communication and you feel like you can trust your partner. Just be honest and be like, hey, I would like if we tried this. What are your thoughts? Mm-hmm. And then just let them speak. What do you think?
Yeah. I mean, I think a lot of it starts with the heart of generosity. And like if you have, I think you have to, before you ask for anything really in life, and this is demonstrated in the Lord's Prayer, like, before we come to God asking for things, we're saying, God, we're entering his courts with praises and thanksgiving. And not that your spouse is God or your Lord or whatever, but it's more, I think it's a great model and example. So if you come into marriage, you're a newlywed, and on honeymoon night, wedding night, you're saying, girl, this is what I want. Do this. It's kind of like, no. Like, I would be pissed. I would be like, no, you tripping. But if you come in like, all right, I want to serve you and I want to give you what you want first, she's going to say, baby, what do you want? You won't even have to ask. But I think there is a lot of just going into it. You have to start the baseline and establish each other's baseline, because I'm wondering with somebody asking a question like, how can I teach them what you want? My question is, how do you know what you want already? Especially if you are, and it's okay if you had experience, because we did, whatever, you've experienced things, like that's fine. But I do think you need to come into it with a blank slate of like, I just want to explore. I want to do this with you. I want to have fun. I want to discover. I don't think you should come in with like your checklist, your to-do list of like, this is what I want each night, or on this night I want to try this, on that night I want to try this, of like your grocery shopping or something. Like, this is supposed to be like an experience.
So I do think from a premarital standpoint, because I wouldn't be shocked if somebody asks this question who's already married, but
or engaged.
From a premarital concept, when you're engaged, I think this is appropriate time to have this conversation. I think it is valuable to ask your partner, and their answer may change in marriage, and that's okay. Mm-hmm. But I think asking them, is there anything you're not comfortable doing, is helpful.
Yes.
Because one, you're giving them the power to say no. Two, then you can start to be on the same page. Like, all right, these are things you're not comfortable with trying. Are you open in marriage to us trying other things and being explorers? Because then okay, this is safe to try, or at least they're open to trying some things. Whereas if you don't know what they don't want to do or not comfortable doing, and then you try something, it just makes things awkward.
I do think it's such a good idea to talk about stuff beforehand. Maybe during a premarital counseling session, so that you're not surprised and you have boundaries, because boundaries in marriage are a thing too, guys.
Yeah, well, that's good about not being surprised, because then you can't be like, when you're married, like, oh, I didn't know you wouldn't want to do this. I just assumed since we married, this is what we're going to do. And it's like, nah, we already talked about this. Now, quickly, if you are married already and you're watching this and you're like, yo, how do I talk about it? Just talk about it. You gotta learn how, and you can try things.
Would it be crazy if?
So, some people, when you're in the moment, you can say, I like that, I don't like this, in the moment, and like that works. And like, it's great if you can work to that. But some people, for whatever reason, that may not work. And then if you try it and they're like, yo, I don't like when you do that. Now you have some data. It's okay. You have to get data in a relationship. You have to
definitely
be able to also read people's body language. Like Pauline just yawned, if you're watching on YouTube. She's tired. We need to end this podcast. It's been going on for a long time. But the same thing goes in the marriage bed. The same way I can read that and be like, all right, we probably should get this going soon. The same way when you're married, if you do something and your partner is kind of like squealing up or like starting to get fidgety, you can see, all right, they probably don't like that. And like, that's okay to have that conversation at that point as well. So, is oral sex considered a sin within marriage?
Is it a sin outside of marriage?
Is it a sin outside of marriage? You tell me.
Why'd you answer like that?
What
of course it is, because I guess it's like, why is it being brought? Like, yeah. Anyway.
Yeah, I mean, if you could find the verse where God says oral sex is bad in marriage, tell us. But I just don't see that. So, again, going back to at the end of the day, because this needs to be quick. And we actually have an episode that talks specifically to this.
Me too.
Our first ever video. Just go to oldest on YouTube. You'll find it. But it's the truth.
We can link it too.
If you, in marriage, at the end of the day, whether it's oral sex or anything else, as long as it's not bringing somebody else into the marriage bed.
And you both consent.
And that's where I was going. You need to be in agreement. Hey, I don't like when you rub my back before we make love. Y'all not in agreement on that. Don't do it. Like
2 yeses or 1 no.
Yes, like let there be agreement on what you're comfortable with and what you're not comfortable with. And if they're not comfortable with, let it go. And you can bring it up in a conversation later on to learn, like, hey, why aren't you comfortable with that? And they may share. And then if it's something they're never going to be comfortable with, you have to be okay with that. Like, again, back to godly relationships, covenant love, for better or worse. You signed up for it. So don't be like, she ain't meet my needs, he ain't meet my needs, I got to go meet my needs somewhere else. Mm-hmm. That's not godly. Yeah. And we read the verse where God said he judges those who fornicate, those who are adulterers, which means you stepped outside of marriage. Mm-hmm. No. Own up to the covenant you made and be okay with that. Because the Bible talks about also being content. Yeah. And you can be, there's plenty of other things you can do besides that one thing that your partner's not comfortable doing. And honestly, sex is so much better when both people are on the same page and in agreement than if one person is not fully in agreement. And agreement doesn't mean that you both love doing it. There's things that me and Pauline may do that she doesn't love doing, but she's willing to do because she knows I love it, and vice versa. And that's okay as well, as long as both are in agreement that we're willing to do this. Mm-hmm. Next thing, as a wife, well, we kind of already went into that. Did you struggle with the bedroom? We talked about that. Last thing, was it worth it to wait to have sex before marriage? Yes, 1,000%. Waiting to have sex before marriage with each other was worth the wait because we already had enough baggage before we ever met each other about sex. We didn't need to add more baggage going into it of, well, we done fooled around beforehand and we know God didn't want us to do that. And now we got to deal with that. I feel like our journey would have been even harder to get to a healthy place in our sex life. Yeah. That we thankfully are if we would have done things together outside of marriage. Having sex in marriage that you know pleases God is way better than worrying about getting that I'm late text. So we're just going to leave it there. This has been another episode of the W Podcast. We'll see y'all next week. Part 2, going to our story.
Bye.
Thanks for watching this video.
To get more Christian relationship advice, subscribe to our channel.
And make sure you check out our other videos as well.